Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jody Allen, and I am the Robert Francis Ings Director of the Lemon Project, A Journey of Reconciliation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to day 4 of our 11th annual Lemon Project Spring Symposium. Our theme is 4 Centuries of Black Women in America, Freedom, Activism, and Justice for All. Before we begin, I want to read 2 statements to you. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherokees, Nottoway, the Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, the Mattaponi, the Monacan, the Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. Also, the Lemon Project stands with the rest of William and Mary in solidarity with our Asian Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian colleagues and students to say that anti-Asian hate is unacceptable and has no place at William and Mary. I also want to acknowledge that today is the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the 2 panelists for this afternoon. The first is Dr. Margaret B.S. Bristow. Born and raised in downtown Southeast Newport News, the poor section on the city's census tract, this semi-retired college English professor has lived there all of her 69 years. Having earned the BS and MA degrees in English from Hampton University, she went on to earn a doctorate in English from the University of Virginia in 1990. For 48 years, she has been married to Marshall Bristow. She is a founder of a community education business entitled Bernice, which stands for Better Educational Resources Needed in Community Education. It offers to help if you need a writing coach and also proofreading, editing, and grant writing services. A former English dual enrollment, creative writing, and honors English teacher at IC Norcom and Wilson High Schools, and retired associate professor of English at Hampton University. She presently teaches part-time at Hampton University and at Hydenwood Retirement Village in Newport News. Our next panelist today is Dr. Gail Taylor. She is a teacher's teacher, and after 30 years of experience in education. She graduated from Vassar College, Fordham University, and Texas A&M, where she received a PhD in curriculum and instruction with concentrations in multicultural, bilingual education, and reading. While a doctoral student, she participated in the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Bilingual Education and Minority Languages Affairs Fellowship Program. As a tenured professor at ODU, she published two books along with numerous articles and chapters on the academic achievement of diverse learners and multicultural children's literature. Additionally, she taught a study abroad course in Barbados, initiated the African American Read-In chain, and received a Fulbright Hays Summer Fellowship in India, where she had an audience with Mother Teresa. Lastly, Dr. Taylor was recognized for her effective and innovative approach to distance education when she was given the Teletechnic Faculty Member of the Year Award. She's a longtime born-again Christian, and she's currently reading the entire Bible in a year. So it is my pleasure to turn over the panel to Dr. Margaret Bristow, who will begin her presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Zelophehad's daughters and their legacy. And I kind of shortened the title, Dr. Allen. Okay, so let me exhale. I thank Dr. Jody Allen for those warm, fervently given introductions, and Dr. Sarah Thomas and the staff of the Lemon Project, Lemon Symposium at this illustrious university, which can boast of such internationally known graduates such as Thomas Jefferson and Mike Tomlin, coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I will exhale again. Whew. Because we are now about to present what was originally set for March 19th, 2020. Using the biblical discussion of Rabbi Peter Tarlov, who is Rabbi Emeritus at Texas A&M College Station, Zelophehad was a man living during Moses' time who had no sons, only 5 daughters, Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. And according to Jewish customs, those 5 girls were not supposed to get the inheritance, simply because they were women. The whole story is found in Numbers 27th chapter in the Old Testament. Guess what? They did, having petitioned Moses and ultimately God, who gave them their request. I first heard of Zelophehad's daughters' significance from First Lady Letitia Johnson at my church, Zion Baptist on 20th Street in Newport News, almost 2 years ago before COVID hit. So First Lady assured me that they were some of the world's first fighters for the rights of women. So in writing our research proposal for the Lemon Project, I thought of what a fitting analogy to compare these protesting ladies to the early Black women who fought for the right to vote. They had to fight racism and sexism, and the anti-Black women agenda espoused by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, whom one Black scholar and Black suffragist proved unequivocally Stanton was a racist. Just who were the hidden figures which spanned 72 years? Of course, Stacey Abrams and newly elected VP Kamala Harris enjoyed their legacy. It is so much to pack in our 1-hour presentation. The impact of these 4 early suffragists had on women's suffrage history. Those Black women suffrage scholar, Rosalind Terborg Penn, called the second wave in her seminal canonical book, published in 1998, African American Women in the Struggle for the Vote, 1850 to 1920. I'm going to first do the survey poll first, and would you all put the poll up first, and then the slides secondly. Okay, and whoever answers these polls, Dr. Johnson, correctly will get a $100 gift certificate. And you all know I'm joking. Okay, so first question. Second question, you got a third and a fourth one. Dr. Thomas, does everybody understand how the poll is going to work?
The poll is available. You should see it pop up. Yeah, we have one response so far, 2.
Okay, so we have a time limit. This is time sensitive. So you have about another 2 minutes to answer those 2 questions, and 2 others will follow. We have time sensitive responses. Has everybody answered number 1 and 2? Okay. Well, you know what? You all are right for number 1. They have been fighting, Black women have been fighting since 1850. That's when Sojourner Truth showed up at convention. Okay, and number 2, let me see how we did on number 2. The first Black suffragist was You got 40%. Most people got that right. Was Sojourner Truth. Okay. So congratulations on those who got the first one correct. That's 1850. Okay, that's in the first wave of suffragists. Okay, and number 2 was Sojourner Truth, our first. Okay, now we can go on to questions 3 and 4. Okay, are there any questions about the first 2 questions? So, okay. So now 3 and 4 should be up next. There are only 4.
I don't see 3 and 4.
Okay, I don't see them either. I
I
just see the
just see
first
1
2.
and 2.
They should be seeing them. We have some people voting for 3 and 4.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Okay, so we
Maybe
don't see it.
So just scroll down.
Oh, okay, now I see it. Okay, so you have to scroll down.
Oh, okay.
That's it. Oh, it was all of this. Okay.
Okay, now I see it. I didn't know. Okay, so number 3. Let me see the responses for number D. Please respond to the following, okay? There's still, you all on the right track. There's still need to monitor some states, especially Georgia. Okay, number 4, let me see how you all did on that one. Wow, you got it right. The correct answer is Stacey Abrams.
Stacey Abrams.
Yes, that's excellent. You all did real well. Okay, so was there anybody in the audience who got all 4 correct? I know it probably was Dr. Johnson, right? Dr. Johnson, did you get all 4 correct? It's one of my first lady from Zion Baptist. Is she in the audience? Okay, so give yourselves a hand. Yeah, because with the voter ID card, there's a need to monitor a lot of that in terms of and then the people have been purged from the rolls. Wow, for little minor infractions. Okay, so now we're ready for the PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this, but the title is Timeline for Adela Hunt Logan, Black Suffragists, 1863-1915. I'm going to focus on her as one of our early Black suffragists, Adela Hunt Logan. Now, you all remember President Obama when he did in his first election, there was a lady by the name of Elizabeth Alexander who read a poem for him for his first election. I'm talking about her great-grandmother. Adela Logan's great-granddaughter was Elizabeth Alexander. Okay, some of you all too young to remember that. Okay, we go to the next slide. Here's a picture of her. And the very, very, very well-written, well-crafted biography of her is called The Princess of Hither Isles, Adele Logan Alexander. She's retired from teaching at George Washington University. This suffragette is her grandmother. Okay, and then there's a family photo. You see how many children she has? She would be the lady 3rd from the left. That's Adele again in a I think that picture was their first 25 years of marriage. So it's an early picture. And this is on the campus of Tuskegee. You see her with her husband. She has 6 living children. She actually had 9 children. 6 lived to adulthood. Okay, next slide. You wonder how Adele at such an early period in history got involved in voting. And I think it was because for wanting to give the Black woman the vote, the women the vote. She was involved in a lot of things that would make anybody want some legal resource. For one thing, the lynchings were rampant. She even helped somebody from being lynched on Tuskegee's campus. Okay, so in 1890, they refused to bury her parents in the town cemetery. Okay, now you have to remember, you can see by the way she looked that she was a mulatto. Her father was a Confederate officer, and her mother was half Indian and white. She was what you call according to her granddaughter, she was a voluntary Negro. She volunteered, Adele Hunt Logan volunteered to be Black. Okay, 1895, she joined NAWSA. I pronounce it NASA, the White Voters Organization. She joined that in 1895. The only woman in Alabama to join and become a life member. Okay, now 1900, I'm going to say something about that. She was given an invitation to go to a birthday party for Susan B. Anthony. Guess who did not give her the invitation in time? Who was a very close friend of hers on Tuskegee's campus? Margaret Murray Washington, Washington's third wife. So she should have been at that birthday party for Susan B. Anthony. But she claimed, that's her granddaughter claims, that that mail was deliberately held from her. Okay, 1901, she's writing for articles in various magazines promoting the need for women to have suffrage. We talk about 1901. Okay, so the Women's Journal is the official newsletter of the NAWSA, which I pronounce NASA, the acronym NASA. Okay, next slide. Okay, she was very active, as you can see. She donated some suffrage material as early as 1904 to Tuskegee, where she worked. You have to remember, she worked at Tuskegee in the 1890s. She was Tuskegee's first librarian. Okay, 1905, she wrote another article encouraging Black women to vote. Okay, 1906, had a kidney removed, and she was very fortunate to have a orchid named after her by the famous Black scientist George Washington Carver. 1913, she regretted she could not march. She was sick then with the other marchers, and Dr. Taylor is going to tell you more about Ida B. Wells, but Ida B. Wells was in that 1913 march. Big old march on Washington to persuade Woodrow Wilson to pass the 19th Amendment. Okay, next slide. Okay, 1915 is a sad year for Adele Hunt Logan, very sad year. One thing, her husband, in the midst of her doing all of this for suffrage and trying to get her husband to also support the need for women to vote, she found out he was having an affair, and she tried to burn down his office. And of course, she was admitted to insane asylum for a brief time, given electroshock treatment. And sad to say, December 11th, 1915, she jumped 3 stories from the faculty meeting at Tuskegee to her death. And that was 1 month after Booker T. Washington had died. She also was mourning his loss. So she died 5 years before the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote was passed. Okay, so what we're going to do next, and we're going to do a short spirited dialogue, a little tiny dialogue between Margaret Murray Washington and Adele Hunt Logan. Okay, so and then we will go into Dr. Thomas giving a slide presentation of Margaret Murray Washington. And then she's going to go on to another suffragist, Ida B. Wells, and another one, Nancy Helen Burroughs. Okay, so is that okay, Dr. Taylor, if we do the little short spirited dialogue?
Yes, I have my script.
Yeah, that's for people who may have gone to sleep on me with my slide presentation. We're going to wake you up now.
Okay.
Okay, the setting is 1915, the early months of the year, 1915, and is at the Oaks. The Oaks is where Margaret Murray Washington, she's the third wife of Booker T. Washington, and Adele Hunt Logan are talking, you know, woman to woman, and they're having tea at the Oaks. That's the home of the President Booker T. Washington. Okay, and it's
Yes.
okay.
But did you read my article I wrote in 1898? Do you remember it?
We should start with, see, I don't have time for those kinds of politics.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Okay. Sorry. See, I don't have time for those kinds of politics. Here you running around trying to get white women to include us in women's suffrage, when my husband, Booker T. Washington, strictly warned the faculty not to get involved in politics.
What? Has he looked at what Black women have done when they're allowed to vote? Has he really looked at our power?
I am for bringing up the morality of our race. All those babies born out of wedlock, all that high infant mortality, that heavy drinking. You see where I am putting my work: industrial education and keeping our young boys from going to adult prisons. That's why I started the Tuskegee Women's Club and the Moms Club.
Oh, that is good, Margaret. That's good. But look at what Ida B. Wells did with her Alpha Suffrage Club. Those Black women using their vote were able to elect Oscar DePriest in 1914 to the Chicago City Council.
Yes, but did you read my article I wrote in 1898? Do you remember it?
Yes, I remember it well. You had the nerve to say most Black people don't like to take baths.
Yes, I wrote that.
And I hope you go back and read what I wrote in the Crisis, September 1912, about our need to fight to get the vote. They need the vote and the vote needs them.
And I realized you worked well being head of the suffrage committee for the NACW.
Yes, I love working at in the suffrage division of the Negro Association of Colored Women. But Margaret, look at the work you did with the reform school at Mount Meigs. It's still not financially stable. Do you understand that? It's not stable. Now, think about it. Think about it. If we had the vote, we could vote for legislation to give more money for our reform school.
You look so worried here lately. Adela, your hands are shaking. Put the teacup down. Talk to me.
I got a lot on my mind, Margaret. I got a lot on my mind. I lost my grandmother and my baby all in a little over a year. And I have not stopped crying from losing my first baby. And I never knew how racist whites could be until I started working for our suffrage. They need the vote and the vote needs them. Of course I can pass for white. My daddy was white and he had children by my mulatto mother. But I'm tired, Margaret. Tired. I'm tired. I got 6 children to raise. Okay, that ends our little short excerpt. And then we're going to move on to Dr. Taylor with Margaret Murray Washington.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen here? Let me see if I can make that. Full. Okay. Well, anyway, you did get a little introduction into the life and the career of Margaret Murray Washington. And it was interesting looking at these last 3 suffragists, because if you put them on a continuum, Margaret Murray Washington, or Mrs. Booker T. Washington, like her husband, represented the conservative end of the spectrum, in that she really promoted an industrial approach to education. She really encouraged Christian piety and a focus on motherhood. Let's look now at the life of Margaret Murray Washington. Okay. Margaret Murray Washington was born in March 9th, 1865, and she died June 4th, 1925. She was the lady principal and dean of women at the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. And like my colleague said, she was the third wife of Booker T. Washington. And that was not an easy proposition in that Booker T. Washington had two previous wives and he had three children, most notably an elder daughter named Portia, who really resented having to get used to yet another mother. So you can imagine the situation that Mrs. Washington confronted. Interesting enough, the marriage was happy, even though Booker T did grieve his first two wives. And he considered Margaret to be a very capable, well-organized addition to his household. So I guess he was practical in that sense. Something else that I found out about Mrs. Washington is that she often wrote his speeches, and I don't think that she gets credit for that, being his speechwriter. And again, also like her husband, she was noted for promoting interracial cooperation. And like I said, she kind of represented the conservative wing of the suffragette movement. Okay, a big component of Margaret Murray's time at Tuskegee was the establishment of the Tuskegee Women's Club. The Tuskegee Women's Club, which Washington as lady principal and later as dean of women, founded in 1895, became the center for educational, social, and political club work among the elite and educated women associated with Tuskegee Institute. The club's divisions were as follows, and you can see them here: Temperance, the Humane Society, the Mothers' Meeting, which was more geared towards lower class women in the community, the Jail Division, and also a Suffrage division. But even though they did have a division dedicated to suffrage, when I look at her communications, when I look at her correspondence, I definitely see that suffrage was not in the forefront of her particular thrust to improve the lives of African Americans at that time. Guided by the notion that the nurturing and God-fearing mother was key to advancing the race, Washington organized self-improvement programs like the bathroom and Bible for women in the Tuskegee area. She also founded county schools. She worked for the improvement of prisons. She started single-sex vocational schools at Tuskegee. And they even had a town night school for adults unable to attend the Tuskegee Institute. But I came across this bit of correspondence from the Tuskegee Women's Club. And it says here, the leader of the suffrage department of the Tuskegee Women's Club is sincere and enthusiastic. She does not, however, claim that the ballot in the hands of women will usher in the millennium at once. Neither does she see the near approach of the right of elective franchise for her sex in the South. So again, even though there was a division dedicated to suffrage, it wasn't from my research, wasn't in the forefront of their activities. Margaret was also involved in another seminal organization at this time. And what we're seeing is the development of these African-American women clubs, which just became a very powerful tool in the fight to gain the vote. And one of the premier institutions was the National Association of Colored Women. And this was co-founded by Margaret in July of 1896. In 1896, Washington was credited with co-founding the National Association of Colored Women. It became the largest federation of local Black women's clubs. The first president was the activist and suffragist Mary Church Terrell. Some background. The NACWC is an organization that was created through the merger of the National Federation of African American Women, the Women's Era Club of Boston, and the Colored Women's League of Washington, D.C. So this was from a merger of different clubs. From 1896 to 1904, it was known as the National Association of Colored Women. It adopted the motto, lifting as we climb, to demonstrate to an ignorant and suspicious world that our aims and interests are identical with those of all good and aspiring women. Okay. Margaret Washington also served as vice president and as president. And she was, I believe she was she was a fifth president from 1912 to 1916. And in 1915, as president of the NCW, when Susan B. Anthony invited national women's organizations to enter official statements to be published in the 4th volume of the History of Women's Suffrage, Washington responded for the National Association of Colored Women, and her statement was the sole representation of Black women in that volume. And you know, there has been much criticism lodged against the white suffragists because all too many times they omitted or they discouraged Black suffragists from being involved and being represented. Okay. And then in 1915, after the death of her husband, Washington continued to seek the improvement of African Americans. And again, she was very involved in domestic education. She supported schools, and she continued that work until her death in 1925. Okay. Another suffragist who I think was who moved us along that continuum when it comes to radicalism was Nannie Helen Burroughs. And she was born May 2nd, 1879, and she died May 20th, 1961. She was an educator, church leader, and suffrage supporter, feminist, and businesswoman. Originally from Orange, Virginia, Burroughs was brought to DC, Washington, DC, by her mother to obtain a better education. And after graduating from the M Street High School, where Anna J. Cooper and Mary Church Terrell became her role models, discrimination in the district's public school prevented her from maintaining a teaching position. She was considered to be too dark. Burroughs then moved to Memphis, Tennessee to work for the Black Baptist Convention. And then in 1900, at the Richmond gathering of the National Baptist Convention, not too far from William and Mary, Burroughs delivered a power speech entitled "How Sisters Are Hindered from Helping," which won her instant acclaim and attention. Another milestone in Nannie Helen Burroughs' life was the establishment of the National Training School for Women and Girls. And this really represented to me the resilience of African-American women. She was denied the ability to be a teacher in the school system because of her skin color. And so what does she do? She goes and founds her own school. And I believe that was something quite remarkable for a woman at that time to do. So in 1900, Burroughs established the National Training School for Women and Girls, which became a major influence nationally in the education of Black women on land she purchased in the nation's capital. And the school combined a rigorous academic curriculum with industrial training for Black women. She used a home economics curriculum to enable her students to obtain lucrative domestic positions with rich white families, which was a prominent career path for Black women at the time. Oh, the school educated more missionaries from service abroad than any other school. And another thing that really stood out as I was doing this research was the embrace of Christianity. All three of these women were very much grounded in a Christian ethos. It really was the foundation from which they worked. Burroughs also opened the Sunshine Laundry, which trained students to work in the laundry industry and helped the school weather the economic hardships of the Great Depression. And during that time, the White House had all its laundry done through the Sunshine Laundry, which helped the school to remain solvent. Okay. An interesting thing with Nannie Helen Burroughs is that she never married, she never had children. She dedicated her entire life to the Women's Convention and to the school. Okay. And in 1964, the school was renamed the Nannie Helen Burroughs School. Okay. Let me see, I thought I had a quote from her. Okay, But she was definitely much more interested in the suffragette cause. And this is one of her quotes. I was asked by a Southern white woman who is an enthusiastic worker for votes for white women, who is an enthusiastic worker for votes for white women. What can the Negro do with the ballot? I asked her. What can she do without it? When the ballot is put into the hands of the American woman, the world is going to get a correct estimate of the Negro woman. It will find her a tower of strength of which poets have never sung, orators have never spoken, and scholars have never written. The world has yet to learn that the Negro woman is quite superior in bearing moral responsibility. A comparison with the men of her race in moral issues is odious. She carries the burden of the church and of the school and bears a great deal more than her economic share in the home. And this was this was a quote from an article that she wrote for the Crisis magazine, you know, the magazine of the NAACP in 1915. Okay, our last suffragette is a woman who, you know, just continues to impress me and many others. Her activism, her fearlessness, her unswerving belief in everything that this country stands for really made her stand head and shoulders above many other in this field. And today is March 25th is the 90th anniversary of her passing. So I think that may be kind of symbolic that we are honoring her at this time. Well, Nannie, Ida B. Wells Barnett was a supporter of women's suffrage who founded the Alpha Suffrage Club for African American Women, which was the first suffrage club for Black women in Illinois. Besides that, and as you can see here, she was an investigative journalist, she was a newspaper editor, and she was a civil rights leader. She was motivated by the lynching of 3 of her friends, one being a grocer, Thomas Moss, who was an upstanding citizen, and again, because of the racial animus at that time, was unfairly lynched. And because of that, she was motivated to document and to let people know about the evils of lynching, both here, and she went abroad to England and to Europe. She wrote a book which again documented the many lynches that took place in the South, and it was entitled The Red Record. Another one of her many accomplishments was that she was a co-founder of the NACW and also of the NAACP. Okay. And we kind of mentioned, okay, I'll talk a little bit about the Alpha Suffrage Club. This was founded with white colleagues, Belle Squire and Virginia Brooks, in 1913. She was the president. And this was a very important club in that it gave voice to African-American women who were left out of the national suffrage organizations. And it's kind of heartbreaking when you look at the white suffragists about how exclusionary they were and easily dismissive of their Black sisters. So the Alpha Suffrage Club was an absolutely needed organization for this time. And it was very influential in that it did help elect the Black politician Oscar DePriest to the US House of Representatives. So it just galvanized the political muscle of the African-American woman of the time. Okay. One last event that really cemented Ida Wells Barnett's legacy was the women's suffrage procession that took place the day before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson. So on March 3rd, 1913, the day before Woodrow Wilson's presidential inauguration, thousands of women marched along Pennsylvania Avenue, the same route that the inaugural parade would take place the next day. This procession was organized by NASA, or the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And this was designed to illustrate women's exclusion. It was designed to illustrate women's exclusion from the democratic process. The procession was carefully choreographed by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns. The newly appointed appointed chairs of the NACW's Congressional Committee. The committee was tasked with winning passage of the Susan B. Anthony Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was first proposed in 1878, and the amendment read, "The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." But in the days before this procession took place, something very troubling occurred. While Ida and the Alpha Suffrage Club members were rehearsing in Washington, they got word that the national organizations of NACW advised them that their contingent was to be entirely white. The Black women were to march at the tail end of the parade. According to Ida B. Wells, if segregation were allowed to stand in a march of this national and symbolic significance, it would signal that women's suffrage would be more a boon to white supremacy than Black empowerment. Such an idea, unchallenged, would undermine Black community support, squeezing Black suffragists from both ends. Well, how did Ida Wells-Barnes respond? With her voice trembling, a tearful Wells Barnett told the delegation that, quote, "If they did not take a stand now in this great Democratic parade, then the colored women are lost." When Grace Trout, the leader of the contingent, sided with the segregation order, Wells Barnett, vowing to march with them or not at all, left the room. So what happened on the day of the procession? When the women began marching, Ida was nowhere to be seen, but then suddenly appeared out of the crowd to calmly take her place with the Illinois delegation. Two white suffragists, again, her colleagues, Belle Squire and Virginia Brooks, took positions on each side of her. And then Wells Barnett proudly marched with the head ladies of the Illinois delegation, showing that no color line existed in the first national parade of the noble women who are in favor of equal suffrage. And that was a quote from an article by a Black paper that was reporting on the procession. The Broad Axe, the paper in Chicago, gave special commendation to Black Howard University student members of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, led by Mary Church Terrell, who marched in the education section of the parade. So Mary Church Terrell did decide to stay in the back of the parade. That spring, Illinois legislators were awed by the sight of several hundred ASC women lobbying for partial suffrage and against 3 discriminatory bills. The women succeeded on both counts. And in 1915, the women's vote was a determining factor in the election of Oscar DePriest. Okay. The club subsequently applied its canvassing and registration techniques to other wards and men and women candidates in the city. Okay. 15 years later, a year before her death, Wells Barnett became the first Black woman to seek a state Senate seat in Illinois. The election was lost, but a legacy was gained. Black women would be a force, even a decisive one, in politics. And that's the end of my presentation. And as we see with Vice President Kamala Harris, and when we look at representatives like Stacey Abrams, we see that this work continues and that we have successively stood on the shoulders of these women who went before. Now, they may have had different ideologies, but they all believed in the right for African-American women to have a voice in our government and in our country.
Okay, I left out something that could I add that, Dr. Allen, Dr. Thomas? Something I left out when Dr. Taylor mentioned the parade, the big parade they had to promote suffrage. I forgot that Adele Hunt Logan in 1912 had her own parade at Tuskegee with her daughter, Ruth. And what they did, they had white sashes with vote for women, and they marched around Tuskegee's campus. She even made up a song that they were to march into, a little song, and I'm not sure what the tune of Catcher in the Rye was, but this poem that Adele Hunt Logan made up in 1912, a year before the march that Dr. Taylor mentioned. It's called Just as Well as He. If a body pays the taxes, surely you'll agree that a body earns the franchise, whether he or she. Every man has the ballot. None, have we, but we have brains and we can use them just as well as he. If a home has a father, needs a mother too, then every state has men voters, needs its women too. And also in the biographer by her granddaughter, Adele Logan Alexander, she said that you have to remember that the men could vote. So when her husband was voting, he claimed Warren Logan, he wasn't going to leave her out, but she would follow him around the house, quoting from a poem that Frances Ellen Watkins Harper wrote called Aunt Chloe. And in the poem, it says, day after day did Millie, can't read my writing, day after day did Millie grow, just following after Joe, and told him if he voted wrong, to pack his things and go. Yeah, so that triggered it when you said the big march in Washington 1913. It triggered it that she had her march too.
Okay.
1912 Tuskegee.
She was, yes, quite a remarkable figure as well. Okay,
Right.
they were all remarkable in their own way.
That's true.
Yes. Okay, so done. Okay, so what do you want to take questions?
Well,
Can you take questions?
Yes, I want to thank you, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Bristow, for those really amazing, telling us about your research on those amazing women. And they're always amazing women, and I'm so glad that we're uncovering them and making them better known. I want to open it up now for questions from the participants. You can put them in the chat if you'd like to.
One of my students, my good students, Dr. Allen is in the audience. Carolita.
Yes. Yes.
Jones Cope. I see that she's in the Zoom audience.
Yes. She's been supporting us all week. Yeah.
Right. She's a very good student, very memorable student.
I guess I do have a question. I don't want to, but one is just about Margaret Murray Washington. Did you, because she seems to have been as conservative as you said as her husband, but was she even after, because she lived another 10 years after his death, did she prove to continue to be that conservative, or was she did she change any of her thinking after his death?
From what I could read, she still believed in that domestic, approach to domestic education.
The 3 Bs.
But she did get involved in a club, Women of the Darker Race,
right,
which was international. So
That's
I think that was a sign that she was spreading her wings a little bit, where she was interested in women, outside of the United States, from different lands, who were suffering from oppression and sexism. So I think she did, kind of grow a little bit after, but she stayed at Tuskegee and, until her death. So she didn't.
Right, she's right. Dr. Taylor is right. She was the person to start that international organization of women of the darker races.
Yes.
And some of their platforms was like she said on temperance. They wanted to cut down on the number of illegitimate births. They wanted to improve education among Black women. She had the first national conference too, Dr. Allen. And that international conference, it had women from Africa, Haiti, Cuba.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how long it lasted, but like Dr. Taylor said, that she also spread her domestic wings internationally.
Okay, great, thank you. We have, I have a question here from the audience. For the married suffragists, is there any information as to how the husbands handle their wives stepping outside of the norm and speaking out or speaking up?
Well, that was a good question.
I'm thinking of Adele Hunt Logan's husband. He didn't want her to be a member of the NAACP in Alabama, but she was. And he didn't seem to discourage her, but he didn't do a lot of active things to encourage her either.
Mhm.
So that's one thing I noticed. And you're going to find all of that in the biography of her by her granddaughter, Princess of the Hither Isles.
Mhm.
And as for Booker T. Washington, he was for actually the women's vote, but of course, you know, he wanted industrial education come first, and then the vote will be given later gradually.
Mhm.
So that was his stand on it.
Okay.
Now, I found something very troubling with some of our big professors at Howard University. Dr. Allen, you remember Kelly Miller? He at one time was president of Howard
Mm.
back in the day. He was anti-Black women and the vote. He was anti-vote. So I thought he's very vocal about that women shouldn't have the vote at all. And he was a Black, you know, used to be president of Howard University, Kelly Miller.
I have another one from a participant. Ida B. Wells is famous for her anti-lynching campaign. Did she remain active in the suffragist movement after the 1913 march? And the second part of that is, did she coordinate with the national white women's movement?
I'm not sure,
Okay.
because so much of her work was focused on lynching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, she was really focused on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have Nannie Helen Burroughs. I wanted to talk about her. She went on a speaking tour for a presidential candidate, and she had a 6-month-old baby. And she said that she would go on the tour as long as they give her a nurse in every city that she went to. So I thought that was kind of progressive, you know, that at that time that she was allowed to leave the home and then leave the home with a small child. So
and to make demands.
yes.
You know.
And this is a topic that is fairly new to myself. So a lot of this history, and it's sad to say, is uncovered. It's almost like the you know how they say the pyramids. You could keep digging and digging, you still will find new treasures. And I think we're just starting to really dig into the lives of these women. And as Black women, you know, it's like this is a part of my history, and I'm learning this too. I'm learning this too. So I think this is just for me just a starting point, and into because we're seeing that their lives are saying a lot to us today. And I mean, you know, we are the fruit of what they planted many years ago. So I'm looking at this as just the beginning.
Absolutely. I think Black women have been terribly ignored and left out of the story, but they were there all along.
Yeah, they were there.
Every movement, every time something needed to be done, there were Black women there who were part of getting it done, at least.
And
yeah.
And again, Ida B. Wells, she just amazes me with her fearlessness, because she was threatened with lynching. You know, her newspaper was burnt down because you know, the whites were just angry at her, you know, reporting on the lynching. So she had to run. I mean, that fearlessness, you know, not everyone will do that. Okay.
Sure.
Something else.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Allen, I found something else about Ida B. Wells. I'm finding out that I know Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, but you know what I'm finding? That there are more women that also refuse to give up their seats that aren't recognized, hidden figures giving up their seats. And I'm quoting from Princess of the Hither Isles, from the book by her granddaughter, Adele Hunt Logan's granddaughter, Adele Logan Alexander. But she says on page 106, she'd also heard, that's Adele Hunt Logan, heard about the recent ordeal of Annabelle Wells, a spunky young brown-skinned teacher who'd been traversing neighboring Tennessee in a reserved seat on a first-class ladies' carriage when a conductor ordered her to yield her place to a white woman. When she refused, he tried to drag her off, but she resisted, braced her feet against a seat back, and clamped her feet into his hand. Bellowing in pain, he booted her out of the door onto the gravel roadbed. She was deeply assaulted and slightly injured and took her complaints to court. First, she received a positive legal judgment, but the railroad company appealed, bought off her lawyer, and finally won his case. Yeah, so she did the same thing as Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman had all that work she did with the Civil War, in terms of the Civil War, being a scout, being the first woman to lead a raid on an army. She was thrown off a train, injured. She said she suffered with a stiff shoulder for the rest of her life. Some white guy saw it on the train and he vowed to stand up for her, but he disappeared. So she was not able to carry that suit forward. Yeah, so that's two women that, would move.
Yes, yes. Transportation was certainly often a site of conflict and where Black women had to take a stand. Here's another question from the participants. It says, I'm sure you mentioned this and I missed it, but was the dialogue you both read aloud a documented account of a conversation between those two women, or was it a creative piece that you devised?
Oh yes, that was done. Is Dr. Johnson still on? Jawan Johnson, is he on? Because that was done, Dr. Allen, for an Asala group in the branch in Atlanta. That particular piece was done, and that's totally created, but it's based on real research from me. It's based on real research. I didn't make up anything in that dialogue. And also too, once you read the new biography of her, Princess of Hither Isles, you're going to find out that Margaret Mary Washington and Adele Hunt Logan Adele Hunt Logan Hunt didn't have the best relationship. That when she was invited to the 80th birthday of Susan B. Anthony, she should have gone, but you know what? The word was that Margaret Mary Washington went into the mail of the faculty. She censored their mail. Wow. And because Gail, she wasn't invited, she was going to make sure Adela Hunt Logan wasn't invited. Isn't that something? And also too, when her husband died, the person who should have been the next president of Tuskegee should have been Adele Hunt Logan's husband, because he was the big treasurer of Tuskegee. But Margaret Mary Washington went and bad mouthed the man because his wife had nervous breakdown. So she bad mouthed him. How can we have a president's wife who's not stable, so forth, so on. So she messed up Warren, what's his name? Warren Logan's, Adele's husband's chance of becoming president of Tuskegee.
Wow, okay. Another question here. In what ways do these Black women suffragettes inspire you in your own lives?
Wow, that's a good question.
Well, Adele Hunt Logan, even though her life ended tragically, and I think that has something to do with that electric shock they gave her in 1914. I think that has something to do. But what it did was, you have to remember she had 9 children and 6 survived to adulthood. What it did was to show me, Dr. Allen, and whoever asked the question, that you can combine motherhood, research, and activism. I'm one of these type women that I didn't want any children because I thought they was going to interfere with my career. I wanted all for me. And now I'm 71 years old with no children. You see, so what it did is with what they put up with back then and did as much as they did, certainly I could have done the same thing in terms of motherhood. You see what I'm saying? Motherhood, activism, and research.
Mhm.
Adele was able to get a master's degree, or it was an honorary master's degree from Atlanta. You know, so it was so much they did, you know, with the twin evils of racism and sexism. So much they did to inspire me.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm so glad that I got back into this research because as an ex, I used to be like a hippie new ager, and I just came back to my Christianity, and I'm really quite impressed that these women were so grounded in the Christian tradition. And I'm somewhat inspired to maybe reach out more to young women and to help them make maybe some better choices. I'm a mother. I had one. I squeaked one out, and I know I would have done some things differently if I could start over again. And I think at this age, I'm about 10 years younger than my sister Margaret here. I think if I could have done things differently, I would like to share some of that with younger women. You know, again, how do you combine being a mother and having a career and being active in the community? And how can you do that from a Christian Bible-centered perspective? So that's where I am at this point.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Now, one more question. As you both articulate, the struggle for suffrage began much earlier than people generally think. How do we correct these narratives and center Black women?
I think we should argue for them being included in the curriculum. When you have a chance to go to a school board meeting, when you have a chance to be anything to do with anything dealing with the school situation, you got to try to, you know, promote that agenda of these hidden figures in terms of women's suffrage. You have to do that. And even on a personal basis, Dr. Allen and Dr. Thomas, I recently attended a Zoom in which I had no idea that Black women trying to start unions actually goes back to 1866. Unions.
Mhm.
And Nancy Helen Burroughs was one of them that started an early union. And I said to myself, you know, they were cleaning up people's houses and they wanted, you know, to be paid fairly well because they were out of slavery. So first Black women started unions in 1866, and it was domestic union. You know, I think somebody's done research to show how the Black domestics got together with the Irish domestics and they demanded better pay. Well, that's a figure that needs to be promoted. And I remember getting a chance, I was working with a young girl in my house, and I told her that I saw her eyes light up, you know, so what I was trying to do was share it even on a personal level, even if you don't get to the school board, you know, in terms of things that should be emphasized in terms of Black women's contributions.
Mhm.
And I agree with you when you look at curriculum, and specifically, I love to look at children's literature. I studied children's literature as part of my doctorate under Donna Norton. And one thing that we really need to do is to see these stories more reflected in the children's books. I have seen more about with the white suffragettes like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but we need to hear more from our Black suffragettes like Ida Barnett Wells and Nannie Burroughs. So I think that's an area that needs to be looked at and emphasized in the near future.
So thank you. We don't have, that's all the questions we have right now from the audience. Are there any last things you all would like to say in terms of wrapping up today?
Again, this is a rich field of research, and I think there's a lot of food here, many treasures that need to be unearthed, and we're in an ideal situation in academia and higher education to tell these stories and to get the word out. So I'm looking, at what's to come. But we really need to know more about these women. It's a sin that they are not better known.
Now, do the two of you have plans to continue this research and maybe turn it into an article or a book?
We are
Not for me, Dr. Allen. I'm trying to promote a book I turned in recently to McFarland Press. They want me to totally redo a different vein of research. I got to go way back to the drawing board. So I'm trying to deal with McFarland Press.
Okay.
And what they were interested in, they weren't interested in educational, what I call traditional education books involving Black folk. But when I suggested that, would you be interested in a book in which the English teacher hooks up with a gamer, a person who does games, and what they do is read Black teen novels, Black author teen novels, and then develop a game whereby the student could be turned on with a novel from a game. She said she was all for that. She's all for that gaming connected with Black teen novels, using gaming or software interaction. She's all for that.
Okay.